All right, greetings, folks, and welcome to another edition of Favorite Funny. I'm your host, Carl Kozlowski, and each week I bring you some of the greatest, funniest faces in showbiz, and I ask them about their favorite funny life stories, career stories, and favorite funny books, movies, TV shows, etc. And today, my very special guest is an LA legend, a man who was the king of radio and still is, rocking it on Sunday nights there. A man named Frazer Smith, and he's also the MC at some of the best clubs in the country, including the Laugh Factory Hollywood and the Ice House in Pasadena. So, ladies and gentlemen, Frazer, do you like that, a studio audience?
That was a good audience, Carl.
Yeah. It's COVID. No, I'm just kidding.
So how are you doing? Audience,
yeah. So how is COVID treating you out there in LA? Are you got a commission getting to perform places, or do you have some way of going about it?
Well, I'm just trying to get every vaccine I can. I've now had all of them, and I want to go back for more.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, because I want to be fully protected by the time I get back on stage.
I think people need to just wear the full body condoms like in the Naked Gun movie.
Why not? That would be a good idea. Actually, you'd probably sell a lot of those.
Yeah. So, has there been any word about the LA comedy scene coming back at all? Or because I've heard that they announced today California is going to be reopening in June, but just with masks on.
I don't know. I haven't really heard too much. I guess what I heard was maybe June.
Yeah,
it might be before that, but I think that's what I heard.
Okay, gotcha. So, yeah. I mean, and has there been any funny new hobbies you've been doing or anything to pass the time since you have to cool your heels and not be on stage?
Well, yes, Carl, I've taken to sculpturing. I've been sculpturing a lot of things. And one of the things I made a sculpture of you.
Oh,
and I gave it to a friend as a gift, a mutual friend. And I drove by the other day and it was out in the driveway. So I don't know what that means. Either I did a bad sculpturing job or I don't know.
I hope it wasn't the nude one that I posed for.
I think it was that one. Yeah.
Okay.
He was using it to scare away crows.
Exactly. All right. Well, so let's jump in on the life tour that this show is supposed to provide. So,
by the way, I hate to tell you this. I don't know if this is the time to mention it, but the cops are looking for you here in town.
Oh, really?
Every day. You don't know how I cover for you. Every day. Hey, where's Kozlowski? They drive by, come up to the door. Have you seen Carl? Where's Carl? I go, I don't know. I haven't seen him. I always cover for you. And, but they're looking for you. Just want to let you know that. Might not be the best time to bring that up.
Well, I'm halfway across the country, so I'm fine. But
we'll see.
Yeah. So tell folks about yourself. Like you were like the king of like rock radio in morning shows and things like that for decades in LA, and you're still doing Sunday nights, correct, on KLOS, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did you get into radio to begin with? I mean, what was the thing that lit your spark to want to do it?
Well, basically because I was trying to get out of taking a real curriculum in college. Couldn't even say it, curriculum.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take a real, I was doing poorly in school. So I instead I started working at the radio station because you could get credits for that. And then it just sort of caught on and I enjoyed it. And then I got a job. I went to Western Michigan University and I got a job in town on a local FM or AM station, little tiny station. And that was my first radio job.
Huh. And so did you have a lot of freedom to do whatever you wanted comedically since it was a small town, or was it pretty strict?
Well, it's top 40. So you couldn't really, the music had to be a certain style. It was back, and we had turntables, and you were playing those old 45s, with the big hole in the middle. And so you didn't really have a lot of time to think of stuff to do. But they didn't really seem to care that I did comedy. I don't know how many people were actually listening, but it was a regular station and it was only on in the daytime. It was what they called a daytimer.
Huh.
Yeah. And I did everything. You had to do sports, you had to do weather, you had to do news. They had a telecopy, one of those old news machines that you rip and read. And
teletype.
Teletype machine. And so I was reading that and reading the news and doing the top 40 and making jokes. It was fun.
That's great. And so, did you have to go through like years and years of small markets before you hit a big in LA, or how did you manage to make the jump into being like a big cheese in the LA scene?
Well, I only had a couple of stops. I went to I was in Kalamazoo. That's where Elvis is, now, and that's where that station was. And then I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a college town. That's the University of Michigan. I had a show there. And then I went to Detroit and I had a show in Detroit. And then I went from Detroit out to LA and I got on KROQ radio. KROQ is still a famous station out here. And back then it was a real maverick station. It was kind of the far left side of the dial. And it was almost no money there because they were trying to make a sale to a bigger network, which they eventually did. But it was just kind of a, almost like a KRP type scene where it was a tiny little station. And but everyone in town was listening to it because they were playing all the new music. It was when punk rock and new wave music were starting to break. So we had Rodney Bingenheimer on the station, and Rodney is a music expert who knew all the bands. So he was bringing in all the new bands. And so we had everybody in town listening to this tiny little station. And all of a sudden we went from worst to first. We went to first place over all the big stations. And that's kind of how I got my break, because I was on the air there goofing around. And, you had a lot of freedom there because we really didn't have any adult supervision. So we kind of just, had the inmates were running the asylum. And it really caught on.
Was that like in the late 70s, early 80s, or what?
Late 70s.
Wow. Okay.
77, 78, 79.
Yeah. And then, and where else were you in prime spots? I know KLOS has been something you were at in the past and now are back on. So was there any other key stations in between?
Well, I went
KLOS
from KLOS, from KROQ, I went to KLOS, and I did mornings there for a long time. And then I went to the competition, KMET. And I don't know if you remember KMET. It might have been before you got to Los Angeles. They were the big rocker, and they were kind of the competition to KLOS, because rock was real big back then. Rock was king in those days. And it was pre-rap and pre, really some of the stuff that's, pre-satellite radio. So regular rock radio was huge. So it was KLOS versus KMET, and like a lot of major cities across the country, there was a real battle between your two top FM stations. And KMET was the other station, and I wound up going over there, and they had a famous lineup and were a famous station. Used to have the upside down billboards, and I was there for a couple of years. And then I went to a station called KLSX, which was also classic rock. And I was there for 10 years. And then I worked for Westwood One. I had a syndicated show that was all across the country. I was in 120 markets there. I had a TV show called Rockin' America on NBC that came on after Saturday Night Live.
Wow, that's great.
It was kind of a heyday era for me. We're talking mid to late 80s there, mid to early 90s.
Well, do you have like a favorite funny memory from those days of radio, like craziest thing that happened, that kind of thing?
Oh, well, I don't know. Well, I got into a beef with my boss over, it was a negotiation time, and I got into a negotiation beef with my boss, and he had gotten my slogan. I had a slogan called "Too Hip" was my slogan, "Too Hip," and I took that from a cab driver. I was driving with a cab driver, and he kept saying, "Fraze, you're too hip." He was from Boston. "You're too hip, Fraze." So I made that my slogan, and I had it on a bumper sticker. And he went and got 2 hip license plates on his Cadillac. And we got into this beef. So I told the listeners, and I was pretty big at that time. I was kind of like Howard Stern on the West Coast. I had, thousands and thousands of listeners. So I told everybody, if you see a silver Cadillac with 2 hip plates, give them the finger. So I had everyone in town flipping off my boss. He couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't go every stoplight. Everyone was giving him the finger, and everywhere he went, and I said, honk at him and give him the finger. And finally, he came up to me like 3 weeks later. He goes, call off the dogs, man. He goes, I can't take it anymore. And then I was fired the next day. Carl, what are you going to do?
I know. What are you going to do? There was one incident that I just remember hearing about vaguely, that you locked yourself into a studio and played Stairway to Heaven like for 27 hours.
I don't know if that happened, but that kind of thing did happen quite often. But I locked myself in the studio a lot. There were a lot of incidents where I got into trouble because I think that was the beauty of my character, was that people always want to make fun of their boss, and that was kind of my specialty. And well, I thought it was, except that I wound up getting fired a million times. But that worked for me in the sense that I think it connected you with everybody, and I did a lot of things, to cause that. Remember, I had the Surf Punks on the show. Remember the Surf Punks?
Yeah.
They were a fun band from the 80s, and they were my buddies, and I had them come on. I cut a record with them too. I had a record that I made with them, and they filled up this entire studio with sand and brought in these bikini dancers and Muscle Beach guys, and they played live on the air and just tore the place up. And we couldn't get sand out of there for like 6 months. It was, they wrecked the studio. It was, I did kind of stuff like that every week. I would do something crazy. I remember we had a consultant, and he said monkeys could do this job. So I went and got my friend who worked at the zoo, and she brought in a couple of monkeys, and I had them do the show. And I had the monkeys starting the records, and the consultant got really mad about that. I would just do corny stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of things that just tick the boss off.
Yeah. So then, how did the comedy come about, doing stand up? Like, how long have you been doing that? And was that something you did when maybe you decided to leave radio, or radio left you, or what? Like,
well,
or were you doing it at the same time?
On my radio show, I had my sidekick was Jamie Masada, your friend.
Really?
And mine. Yeah. Jamie, owns the Laugh Factory Club in Los Angeles and all over. He's got a club in Chicago, and there's one in Vegas, and in Long Beach, California. He's at Reno. He's got clubs everywhere now. And back then he was my sidekick, and it was a character called Buddy Buddy. And it was, he was just kind of a nefarious foreign guy, and, I didn't want to do the traditional thing where, an American just picks on a foreigner, but he was just kind of wacky and cartoon-like, and people weren't really sure what country he was from. It was right during the Iranian American hostage thing. And so, a lot of people were kind of upset with foreigners at that time, but Buddy, I think, kind of helped break the ice a little bit there. Everybody loved this character. So he kind of, really kind of leveled things out, and people actually, I think, loved and appreciated that character. So he came to me at one point and he said, I'm going to open a comedy club. And I was like, well, how are you going to do that? I mean, he didn't have any money, and he was just, really not doing anything. And he had run into a big producer who was looking for a tax write-off. So the guy lent him $10,000, and he opened up on that little corner. It was about half the size of what the Laugh Factory is now. And it was the old Greenblatt's. It was the old Greenblatt Deli was half of what the Laugh Factory is now. And wow. Jamie rented that out and started doing shows out of there. Probably held maybe 60 people, and he didn't really have a liquor license. He would get beer from next door at Greenblatt's and sell it, and food from next door. And he couldn't get the A comics. He just had kind of a B and C list version of comics. And I had never done comedy. So he goes, Fraze, come down and host the show. So I went down there. I started hosting the shows. It was a lot of fun. I got into it, and that's how I started in comedy. And slowly but surely, the Laugh Factory grew. I used to promote it like crazy on my show, and my show was really big, so I could fill big places, but I was able to fill his place up, and slowly but surely, some of the bigger comics started to come down the street from the Comedy Store, which, as you know, is down the street on Sunset.
Yeah.
And some of the big names would come down to try out their material. and we had Paul Mooney would come in there, and he would bring Richard Pryor with him, and Dice was coming down there, and Kinnison, and some of the big comics of that era would come down to work on their material at Laugh Factory. So Laugh Factory kind of grew from there. Next door was a place called Ah Fong's, which is a famous Chinese restaurant where all the stars went, because it didn't have much of a decor, but the food was awesome. So the stars would get takeout there. They'd pull up. That was back in the limo era. They'd pull up in their limos, and their driver would run in and get the food and come back out. And Mr. Ah Fong passed away. So Jamie bought Ah Fong's, knocked the wall down. Between all the comics went in there with sledgehammers one night. We knocked the wall down, and he built up a bigger club. And then Fox decided to do the TV show Comic Strip Live out of there. So,
really?
Yeah, that was a big break for Jamie. They were just down the street on Sunset, and that was where the KMET was. Where KMET radio was where Fox Broadcasting was. Fox had bought that entity, and so they opened up this club and remodeled it completely. So Jamie didn't have to pay for anything. His whole place was all of a sudden a beautiful club. And
that's great.
Yeah. So that's how I started doing stand-up.
All right. So do you have, you told me before, because I've interviewed you many times about your comedy. Wasn't there a time that you accidentally said a lady's hair was on fire, or either you did it or she was in the crowd and it was just a funny incident?
Well, that was something where the comic was Tom McTeague. He's a very funny comic. I don't know if he's still doing stand-up. He was great. And he was so funny that people were just dying in the crowd. And this one woman, it was in the big hair era, and she had hairspray in her hair. And it was back in the day also when they had candles on the tables that weren't, now they have the electronic candles, but these were real actual candles that would go around and light before the show. And she was laughing so hard, she threw her head back and it caught her hair on fire. So everybody in the place threw their drink at one time, just reacting threw their drink on her hair. So a lot of that was alcohol. So it just made it even worse. So finally we got the hair put out. And I remember I made a joke about Michael Jackson or something. She should be in the next Michael Jackson commercial. Or remember when he did the commercial for Pepsi where his hair cut off? So I forget what the joke was, but that was
about the hair on fire. Yeah,
that was a weird night.
Yeah. Well, are there any other moments from stand-up that stand out to you as particularly weird or funny?
Well, there's plenty of them. I don't know if I can. I guess one that I remember, and I still think this was a funny night or day. It was actually in the daytime. Gallagher, remember Gallagher? Yeah,
Gallagher. Yeah.
Yeah, he was very popular.
He smashes watermelons and stuff.
Yeah, and he was very popular back then. He did a lot of Showtime specials, and he was taping one from the Palace in Hollywood, which is an old theater where they had a lot of TV shows emanated from there. That's where the old Dean Martin show came from, and many other shows. And so he was doing his special there, and I was the host, and it was just me and him. So I did a bunch of stand-up, and it was packed, and it was standing room only packed. And Gallagher, it was a great comedian, was doing a bit, and he came back. He was off stage, and he came back in a pink tutu with a seltzer bottle, and he was blasting the crowd with the seltzer bottle. So the crowd started to, people had squirt guns in the crowd and stuff like that. They started blasting him back and throwing drinks at water at him and stuff like that, thinking they were playing along. They weren't trying to heckle him. They were playing along with him. They thought, and he got really mad. So he tossed the entire crowd out. And this is about halfway through the show.
Oh, man.
He goes, "You get out, all of you now." And he went out and got a bullhorn and told them all to leave. So they left. And so then he came backstage and he goes, "Frazer, I got rid of all of them. How about that?" And I go, "Well, what are we going to do now?" All the executives were pissed. It was so what they did was they took the bullhorn and they went down to Hollywood Boulevard, which is right around the corner, and started saying, "A free drink to anyone who comes to the Palace right now." So all of a sudden you've got, prostitutes, drug dealers, the gnarliest crowd possible. It looked like Dawn of the Dead walking towards the Palace. And that was our crowd for the rest of the night. It was just a bunch of crazy drunk Hollywood Boulevard characters.
That's awesome. So, well, let's get into some of the things about your life and career that we've discussed before the show. Like you mentioned that when you were 7 years old, you managed to tell the Prime Minister of Canada to shut the f up. So, what happened there?
Well, I was at a thing. Most of my relatives are from Canada, and we had gone to hear I forget how we got in to do this, but we somehow got in. One of my uncles or something got us in, and the president was speaking in their town. It was a little town outside of Toronto, and the prime minister, not the president. And so we were there, and it was just one of those things where, where you're a kid, you get very restless, and you just don't want to hear it, and it's droning on and on. Politicians seem really annoying, just kind of like they do now. For me, but this guy was droning on and on and on. And I just remember it was like an E.F. Hutton moment. Everyone was silent for just a second. And I yelled, "Shut the fuck up." I just, as a kid. And I remember everyone in the place turned around, and the guy goes, "I beg your pardon, son."
That's awesome.
My dad wanted to kill me.
Well, that probably helped plant the seed for your being, outrageous on the radio, though, no doubt.
Well, maybe.
So, yeah. So then, one of the things that you also mentioned is that you did a really screwy Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs appearance with the Tom Snyder show. Now, Tom Snyder, for people that don't know or don't remember, he was had a late night show called Tomorrow on NBC, and then eventually he started the Late Late Show that now is run by James Corden. He did the first version of that on CBS in the mid '90s, and he was a little different for a late night host. He was more thoughtful and a little more low key. Correct?
Yeah, and that's where I think where I ran into trouble. I did the show, and Tom was actually a really good guy, but he was real big at that time, and they had the top morning DJs in the country on the show. That was the deal. And I can't remember, and I don't know why they didn't have Howard Stern on there. I guess because maybe he wasn't even on the scene yet. But they had a guy from Cleveland, a guy from Baltimore. I don't even remember their names really at this point. But I was on there, and I just, for some reason, I was in a wild mood, and I had my sharkskin suit and my sunglasses on. That was my old getup, and I just started to riff on Tom. I was starting to make fun of his suit and make fun of everything. And he was getting madder and madder, and the audience loved it, and the audience was loving it. And Tom was getting madder and madder. And eventually I got tossed off the show. And it was kind of like when I made fun of the Canadian Prime Minister, but everyone saw it, and it made a big buzz around the country. So that was kind of actually good for me.
Wow, that's cool, man. So did you ever do any of the other late night shows? I mean, typically, I would say it seems that Howard Stern is usually the only one big enough to make it onto the Tonight Show or a Letterman show. So there's no shame in not getting on those. But did you ever get a shot at any of those?
I never did. And I don't know why, but I never was on one of those shows. But at one point I was really big, and I was at a party, and Johnny Carson was there. And I remember he said to somebody, "Hey, I hear Frazer Smith is here." And he wanted to meet me. Because my name was huge, but I never really got on those shows. And I think part of it had to do with I really wasn't developed very much as a stand-up comic at that time. I was just kind of getting started. So I really didn't have the, I really couldn't go on as a comic. I was only in one market. So people didn't know me across the country, I was really only known in LA. So I think maybe that was it. But no, I never got to do one of those shows.
Okay, well, then one of the people that you're a big fan of and got to work with, you said, was Rodney Dangerfield. So what was that like? What do you like about Rodney so much?
Well, I like Rodney because of his one-liners,
Yeah.
He's probably the best at that of all. And, that's what I do. I do one-liners because that's kind of just how I got started. When I was on the radio, I had to write a lot of jokes. And so that's when I started doing stand-up. That's what I would do, is just a bunch of jokes. So that kind of became my style. It's not a style that everybody does or everybody likes, but most people like one-liners. And Rodney was the best. and it was an area when he was really hot, on the Tonight Show and everything. And I got to know him because I was the host at the Laugh Factory, and he would come in every Friday night and do my show. And we got to be buddies, and he was, a great guy and liked my jokes. That was a real plus for me when he told me, "Hey, kid, do you write those jokes yourself?" All right. He used to love my jokes. He wanted to buy some at one point. And so he was a great guy and a great, great comic.
That's great. It is also a part of your favorite movie. Your favorite funny movie is Caddyshack. So any thoughts about, what jumps out at you about that movie that makes this such a classic?
Well, I just liked the movie. And again, I always liked him in everything he did. He was great in Back to School, too, and Easy Money and all the stuff he did. But everyone else was great in that movie, too. Bill Murray was great. Chevy, the whole cast was like top of the line. And I always thought that was just a really funny movie. We've all seen it a million times, and it still plays pretty funny to me.
Yeah, it does. So then, as far as TV goes, you picked something that for your favorite funny show that goes way back to the point where I'm pretty good about comedy history, but I'm a little unfamiliar. I know who the guy is, the Soupy Sales show. So could you set that up for people who may not know who that was?
Well, the reason I put that on there is there's plenty of shows I like today that we all watch, right, that are funny.
Yeah.
But the reason I put that one on is a lot of people don't know about it, especially younger people. Soupy Sales was a guy, when I was growing up in Detroit, he had a local Detroit show, and then it later moved to New York City, and then it moved to LA, and he was really popular everywhere he was. It was just a silly show, and the reason I bring it up now is that during the COVID lockdown, they show the Soupy Sales show every day on the Jewish channel.
Really?
Yeah, and it's on every day at noon, and I watch it every day. And he's just silly. He's got these puppets that he works with. One is a lion called Pookie, and the other is a hippopotamus. And then he's got a dog, White Fang, and another dog, Blacktooth. And people keep coming to his door and bugging him. And it was just really a low budget show. And he made the most of the low budget. I just always thought he was just really a funny, naturally funny guy and wacky guy. Some of it seems really kind of corny when you look at it now, but a lot of it's still very funny. And he was kind of a cult favorite. He got real big in New York, and to the point where he played, I think he did a show at Shea Stadium before the Beatles and sold it out. That's how big he got. And,
That's wild.
he was big. And guys like Sinatra, a lot of the big stars loved him and would go on his show and do cameos on his show. I remember seeing the show where Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. went on there as guests. And what he would do is he would hit people with a pie, which is an old vaudevillian thing. And
Sure.
And so everyone, it got to a point where all the celebrities wanted to be, it was a cool thing to get hit with a pie on Soupy's show. They all wanted to go on and get hit with a pie.
Well, changing gears pretty greatly, your favorite book, as far as funny books, is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. And so tell me, why does that jump out at you?
Well, I'm sure I may have had funnier books I've read, but I just always thought he was a real character. And I really loved his style of writing. I think a lot of people did, because you hadn't seen that kind of writing really before. Maybe Tom Wolfe sort of had something similar going before that, but it was basically stream of consciousness. And some of the shenanigans that he pulled in Las Vegas were just absolutely off the charts funny to me,
Yeah.
because we've all spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, as comics. We work there, and you see, I love Vegas, but at the same time, you see the cheesy side of it and the touristy side. And I think he really poked fun of that and just was outrageous and, very aggressive. And the whole thing about it was he was supposed to be covering the Mint 400 motorcycle race, which was just outside of town. And instead of doing that, he was just taking drugs and just running rampant on Las Vegas.
That's crazy, man. So I guess the last thing that we had discussed talking about is that you opened for another comedy legend in Reno. So you're talking about the great acts in Vegas, but you got to open for Shecky Green in Reno. So what was that like?
Well, Shecky Green was another guy that I always admired. And I would say on the end of my show, I had a sound effect of a jet. And I don't know why I did this. I don't know, but it became really popular. I would go, when I was about to leave the studio, I'd go, Shecky, get the jet. And I played the jet sound effect. And it just sounded stupid to people who don't know it. But for whatever reason, everyone loved it. And so I got to know Shecky, and he invited me to open for him. And he was just a real character. You know, he was one of the comics of the Vegas heyday when comics were making big money on the Strip. He was making $50,000 a week, and he got into trouble. He said something about Sinatra that Sinatra didn't like, and he had a joke, and it was Frank Sinatra saved my life. He goes, 6 guys were beating me up out in front of Caesar's Palace, and he walked by and said, "That's enough." So you know, he was well known for that. And I remember another quick story with him was I was having lunch one day with Norm Macdonald and Bob Saget, not to drop names.
Oh, sure.
Two of the funniest guys, I think, anywhere, right? And we were at Nate and Al's deli, and all of a sudden this guy is standing up on top of the table doing jokes in the middle of the day. This is like around lunchtime at a busy deli. We look around, and it's Shecky. And so we go, Shecky Green. He just stood up and started telling jokes on top of the table. So he joined us, and he told us all these unbelievable stories about Vegas. And we just had the greatest time talking to Shecky Green.
That's wild. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. And, glad to see you're still, being funny and in good spirits, even after a year in lockdown.
Well, thank you, Carl. How are you doing? Are you feeling okay out there?
Yeah,
and, where are you?
Doing great. Everything's cool, man. Yeah.
Have you seen my buddy Little Rock Larry out there?
No, but I heard I have to look out for him.
Watch out for the guy.
Yeah,
he's trouble, man. He's out in that area. He's a farmer who went into stand-up, and he also does bird calls.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll be sure to look out for him.
And I'll tell the cops I haven't seen you. Your secret is safe.
Thank you. All right, folks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. And this has been Frazer Smith. I'm Carl Kozlowski. And join us the next time on Favorite Funny.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.